Holt, and I am the lead consultant for the Executive Steering Committee work and strategist for the overall project, along with Erica, who is part of the Tri-Excellence team and is the lead strategist and consultant for the Historic Albina Advisory Board. We look forward to this moment. We've been working diligently, as you've heard me say, to create a space for us all to come together. We did last week for our first time. And unfortunately, the COAC is not with us in this particular meeting, but will be joining us again as we move forward. So thanks for being in the space. It's going to be a great conversation and a fantastic meeting. Much to cover and much to do. So Erica, if you will give us our kind of introduction and get us flowing, and then we'll go to our next phase.
Indeed. If you will share the slides, I would appreciate it. Thanks again to all of you. We understand there is a lot happening, not only in many of our professional lives on this committee, and I'm sure in our personal lives, but we thank you for your commitment to the work. We want to make sure that if there are those who are joining us in the virtual space, keep in mind, this is a meeting that is open to the public. It is not a public meeting, but we will have an opportunity for you to give some public comment. So govern yourselves accordingly. The number there is on the screen. Be ready to call 971-247-1195. Next slide, please. We appreciate both committees coming together. I know there are some HAAB members that would be joining us a bit late, but we're going to have a project update. We're going to, as I mentioned, give an opportunity for public comment. And then we're going to hear from the independent cover assessment team. They're going to give us an update, a recap of work session 2, talk through some neighborhood visioning ideas and governance structures. And then we're going to have Dr. Holt lead us in a discussion. We want you to know that we heard you and we are looking forward to having some real robust discussion around what community priorities we are having for the historic Albina neighborhood. And then we'll move on to next steps. Next slide. You all should be fairly aware of these, but I just want to reiterate in this space because this is passionate work. Often we can get bogged down with the passions, some of the emotions of dealing in this kind of work. We want you to know we want to hear from you. Make sure that you are speaking. If we don't hear from you, Dr. Holt may be calling on you, but your voice matters. While you're speaking, we always appreciate your authentic truth. Sometimes it's uncomfortable, but we need to hear. Oftentimes that's how we grow, is in discomfort. So speak your truth, be your authentic self, and listen for understanding before you speak. Oftentimes we can clarify some of the issues and feelings just by listening more deeply. We want you to deal with the issues, not the people. We are all in this space. All of us wish no harm on each other. We want the best and the most positive outcome for the Albina community. So we want to deal with the issues and move forward collaboratively. Oftentimes, again, as I mentioned, we're going to experience some discomfort because of the passion, some of the harms that we've experienced going into this space, but we're moving forward. So remain respectfully engaged. We hope that those who are participating on the boards, those presenting would keep their cameras on so that we can do our best to engage as we would in an in-person environment. And again, we cannot solve everything for this community in this meeting, nor even on this project, but we want to create a path that moves us together forward. Expect and accept non-closure. We want to make sure that we hear you and we're carrying those thoughts forward. Next slide, please. Thank you. With that, Dr. Holt, I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Erica. I appreciate it. Prior to going into our project updates, we're going to ask our chair of the Executive Steering Committee, Orlando Simpson. So let me give you an opportunity to have some opening comments.
Thank you, Dr. Holt. Thank you, Erica. I think you guys took a lot of the words out of my mouth as it relates, mainly Erica. She's pretty good at capturing the importance of this and also how sensitive and sensitive this conversation is, but I want to welcome everybody back. I know last week we had a bigger group, so obviously this is a little bit more of an intimate conversation. But as I've alluded to in the past, and I try to continue to remind folks that this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. These things don't come along too often, and they clearly haven't come along very often, especially for the Black community. I just want to be very adamant that, you know, folks are thinking about the long-term impacts and benefits as opposed to what is essentially being presented just in front of us today. I think questions are going to be super important. And just a quick summary or a capture of last week when I had to jump really fast off, and obviously there was 30 minutes of conversation that went on, and I'm not sure it went in a stable direction. I mean, because there's just a lot of opinions, so it's really hard to get everybody on the same page. We have a lot of ideas and thoughts and feelings going into a process. But one of the things that I mentioned was I believe that these concepts need a deeper dive. And that deeper dive, I believe we're going to get into today. And the other thing that I mentioned at the end was that there's a big elephant in the room, and that elephant comes with a big bag of cash. And I know this makes people very uncomfortable talking about money, especially people who have a lot of money. But the reality is the people who don't have a lot of money, i.e. the Black community in Portland, Oregon, needs to understand and is owed the freedom and space to understand how the dynamics of capital will work on this project. Not just as it relates to what ODOT's piece is, but also the additional resources that have gone into this and that will potentially go into it as a result of when this project is at its completion. So I know I'm going to have lots of questions today, and just giving my understanding of commercial real estate and finance. I'm very excited to have a lot of these questions answered, because a lot haven't still been answered to me, even as the chair of the ESC, let alone the community member, because I'm a volunteer. So I'm really excited to hear what some of the responses are going to be as it relates to what really leads to restorative justice from the lens of economics. And so I just wanted to put that there and let the HAAB, this group, this body know that, you know, the HAAB is going to obviously make a recommendation to the ESC. The ESC is going to be charged to make a recommendation to the OTC. And as somebody who's kind of right in the middle of all of that, I'm very optimistic that we're going to get to something that is going to be confident and our community is going to be comfortable with recommending to the state. But I just want to make sure that people put the community before their personal motivations in this process, because time after time, we all know we've seen the Black community be abused and exploited, not necessarily just by majority groups. They've even been exploited by their own people. And so we have to be very cognizant of aware of what's going on around us. And I think that's why this conversation is going to be very important, because there's a lot of empty questions on the table that we need to have answered. And I think the community is owed that, not only to understand that, but also to be able to have every information that is around this project available to be able to make a conscious decision as a recommendation. So looking forward to the conversation today, and thank you again for everybody for being here.
Dr. Holt, you're muted.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair, for your comments. Thanks, Erica, for the capture. Prior to jumping into our project update, I would ask that all of the panelists please turn on your video if at all possible. It's great. I know Erica mentioned it. I just wanted to second that. Thank you for your support. Megan, to you.
Thank you, Dr. Holt, and thank you, Vice Chair Simpson. So yeah, for today, just really building off of what Vice Chair Simpson stated, is we're here to talk about our community priorities as they relate particularly to the highway covers. So a key question that I have today, and again, looking forward to the conversation, is what does restorative justice look like? We want you to help define that and what that is for your community. And at, last week's meeting, we heard a lot of great feedback from you, feedback from many of you that you need the time to get this right for the highway cover decision and identify how the highway covers can both benefit the community from that restorative justice lens and maximize land creation and provide opportunity for restorative justice, and also find a way to do that that fits within the project schedule as all of those things intersect. So really looking forward to the independent cover assessment team's presentation today. Just continue to appreciate their community lens that they're bringing to this process, the visioning, and the great work that they've been doing to provide the options for future potential use of the highway cover. So really here to listen and learn today. On the, I guess, 2 slides now, I just wanted to kind of take a step back. I know that we've been really focused on the highway covers in a lot, actually on the next slide, please. We've been really focused on the highway covers, but I just kind of wanted to take that step back and a reminder of the different project elements that are included as part of the I-5 Rose Quarter Improvement Project, for which the highway covers are a significant and important part of. But you can see the highway covers shown in pink there in the center. There are a number of other project elements around new crossings over I-5 with the bicycle and pedestrian bridge and new roadway connections, the improvements to the I-5 corridors themselves, the I-5 corridor itself, as well as local multimodal street improvements. But this is really just to emphasize that the highway covers are part of this broader effort, but a significant part in how we help knit back together the Albina community. So with that, Dr. Holt, I will turn it back to you.
Thank you, Megan. We're going to move to the next section, which is our public comment. Prior to the public comment, let me just highlight again what we've talked about at this meeting, as well as the HAAB meeting, that while it is a meeting open to the public, it is not a public meeting. And so our request has been that the comments be germane to the agenda, that they're reflective of what's being discussed in the meeting. And it would be great to respect the people who have given their time and their energy to be a part of the executive steering committee. And so I know that we've heard from No More Freeways and we've heard from other groups on a regular basis, fully understand the concern as it relates to this work. But again, in respecting the people that are in this space, it would be great that you address the concerns that have been reflected by these committees. Now, by no means can we restrict, or am I attempting to restrict public comment, but I do want to be very clear in terms of the respect appropriate for the work that is happening. So in light of that, you have 1 minute to voice your thoughts, your concerns. There are several other ways to express what is in your mind and in your heart, and those have been articulated and promoted. So let's go to our moment of public comment. Do we have anyone in our waiting space?
Hi, Dr. Holt. I'm just looking, not seeing any raised hands at the moment. Thank you for teeing up the public comment portion of the agenda. Just a reminder, if you're joining us on the phone, please dial *9 to raise your hand, and we'll be able to call on you. And if you're watching on the live stream, you'll need to dial the number shown on the screen, 971-247-1195, and then enter webinar ID 84926437770 and passcode 407920, and then dial *9 to raise your hand. And please remember to mute your live stream if you are joining us that way. I'm looking in our attendees room and not seeing any raised hands, but I know sometimes it takes a moment to dial all those numbers, so you might want to just wait one more moment.
Absolutely. Hearing from the public and the community is absolutely essential on this project. So by no means are my comments meant to deter any of our community members that want to weigh in. But my comments are absolutely directed at those who are not necessarily reflective or respective to the members who are sitting in this space and volunteering their time. So. I do see a HAAB member's hand.
Yeah.
So let me defer to Keith Edwards. Do you have a question, sir? Thought?
Yes, I raised it. Thank you very much, Dr. Holt. I raised an issue last week in regards to the definition of the term minority, because I know Blacks, I know Hispanics, I know Asian Pacific, I know LGBTQ, I know women, but minority is to me is a vague term, and too often we as African Americans, when we're supposed to be the target of any kind of benefits, we end up being the last in line, and we don't get our due share, and we don't get respected appropriately, and we get left behind again. And so I want a definition of what minority means in that context that was given to us last week, so that we can be real clear. And if it's the definition is not appropriate, then we'll say so, and we'll help them redefine what that term should mean in this particular context.
Thank you, Mr. Edwards. We appreciate that. We will certainly have an opportunity to talk about that today. So thank you. So Natalie, no hands?
I'm not seeing any hands, Dr. Holt.
Oh, wonderful. We will move forward in our presentation for the independent cover assessment team. Let me turn it over. I don't know if it's Gina or Charles.
It's me.
Hi, Gina.
Good afternoon, everybody. Chair Simpson, ESC members and HAAB members. The ICA team is grateful to have this time on your agenda this afternoon, and we too look forward to a robust discussion. I'm not certain we'll be able to answer all of your questions because we're still, all of those questions we're working towards presenting all of our feasibility in work session 3, but we will certainly do our best to be responsive and informative to your concerns today. So we're basically here to give you a preview of where we've been and where we're going. We're actually between work session 2 and 3. And I think that we want to talk with you a little bit, give you a preview of sort of where we're going in work session 3, of the notion about a neighborhood vision that is shaped by the Black historic albino community's input, by all of you who've made input, and by the online open house participants who've also made input in our work session 1 and 2. And then we also want to talk about essentially a strong governance. What we've heard so much discussion in all of our interactions with you is how important governance is going to be to assure that whatever land is made available and however it is developed, that is ultimately going to be in the service of the Black community, that there's going to be oversight, control, and the vision is going to come from the Black community in order to provide restorative justice. So governance is a huge piece of our presentation. I mean, just where we're going with our governance recommendation. So I think Kate will also be able to give an overview of where we are in our technical feasibility analysis. And then today we're going, as we always do, we always have a lot of content and a small window to squeeze it in with you. I would just ask you as we go through our presentation, we have about 30 minutes of presentation, and then we hope to have 35 or 30 minutes or 35 minutes to 40 minutes of opportunity for us to have a discussion. So please take notes and let us get to our presentation. And we look forward to your questions and your comments and the discussion after we have presented. So with that, I'd like to ask Nolan to give us a refresher on what the ICA's charge is, and where we are in our process. Nolan?
Thanks, Gina. So you've seen both of these slides, but it is helpful just to remind everybody where we are in our process, what role this meeting plays in the bigger scope of work that we're doing. So next, there are, in the work that we've been asked to do, 4 scenarios that we anticipate evaluating alongside one another. The first is what we call the base case, and that's based on the NEPA environmental assessment. And then 3 that our team will generate, the first being limited to the NEPA environmental assessment area of potential impact. The second, which may extend beyond that, and then a third, which will be made up of criteria determined by the ESC if it so chooses. And so this is the context for our work and where we are hoping to end up when the ESC makes its recommendation to the Oregon Transportation Commission next. So again, you've seen this slide. It's primarily intended to demonstrate the 3 work sessions that make up our work. The first being really focused on listening and understanding the community's vision, priorities, to inform the creation of scenarios and design alternatives and design concepts. Those were presented, those alternatives and concepts were presented in work session 2 a little over a month ago. And then intent there was to receive feedback about what about those was good, what about them was maybe a challenge or less interest. And we got a lot of feedback in our community workshops. We got some feedback in the HAAB and the ESC meetings. And we're now in a process of taking that feedback, doing refinements, providing additional technical detail and study on those with the intent of producing that updated information at work session 3. So where we are right now is in that dash box, which is in between work session 2 and 3. We're doing a lot of this refinement work. We're pleased to have this opportunity to meet with you in between where we can advance some of these conversations. And then ultimately work session 3 will be where we present the refined scenarios for your review in advance of the ESC making its recommendation to the Oregon Transportation Commission. So happy to talk more about the process and the order of things once we get into the Q&A or the discussion at the end, if it's helpful. Thanks, back to you, Gina.
Thank you, Nolan. Next slide, please. And so, as I mentioned, we're going to talk about neighborhood vision. Next slide. And part of that vision is the vision for our project has been shaped by what we've heard in our work sessions. So I want to, again, give you a quick overview of what was heard in work session 2. Next slide, please. So work session 2 was, again, where we presented our 5 preliminary design concepts. We asked people to react to those and tell us which of those they felt created the most restorative justice and addressed the priorities they had that they had set in work session 1 and had identified in work session 1 for creating community wealth, health, and cohesion, in addition to mobility in the neighborhood. So we, of course, work session 2, as all of our work sessions, included 2 community workshops. It included a 3-week online open house, 1 meeting with the HAAB and 1 meeting with ESC. Next slide. In the community workshops, we had 50 attendees, 43 of whom were from the Black historic community. They were residents, business owners, community organization representatives, church representatives, and youth representatives. We had about, I think we had 4 youth who participated in our last work session, and we're looking forward to a couple more in this next work session. Next slide, please. And as you have seen, all of you have seen this, that these were the polling results. We did a poll at the end of our community workshops to have the participants tell us which of the concepts they felt we needed to move forward and study further. And you can see that the community was pretty unanimous in both of our workshops, our 2 workshops on they wanted to see 4 and 5 studied further. Next. So these are some of the quotes. I think it's kind of important to sometimes get down to the individuals and the comments that have been made. Some of you may recognize these comments. These are the kinds of comments that we have heard in our engagements with community participants, with HAAB members, and with ESC members. So what you see represented here is that many of, or the majority of the folks that have participated in our engagements feel land is extremely important to restorative justice relative to the covers, and that that it's only a small portion of what's deserved based on the history and the harm that's been done to the Black community, and that they feel that this is the best way to create long-term wealth if that land can be controlled and developed by the Black community. Next slide. We also had an online open house, and we had a lot of visitors. We had 87 people fill out the survey. We had a little bit higher Black participation than we did in the first work session. But next slide, I'm gonna just briefly run through, we asked the same kind of questions of the online participants, and for scenarios 1, or concepts 1, 2, and 3, we had more people. We asked a question: should we continue to study this cover concept? And for concepts 1, 2, and 3, we had more no's than yeses. Could you go to scenario 2? More no's than yeses. Scenario 3, more no's than yeses. And then when we got to concept 4 and 5, we had more yeses than no's. So the feedback both from community participants and from the online participants was pretty consistent. We also had very robust and good discussions, lots of questions in our HAAB and ESC member meetings and workshops, but we didn't really gain a consensus. We had strong opinions one way or the other for the things we should continue to study from individual ESC or HAAB members. But we didn't really receive any kind of consensus from either of the committees about which scenarios they wanted us to continue to study. We asked for feedback, and that feedback was supposed to be provided, and unfortunately we got very little written feedback from either of the committees. So we've proceeded based on the feedback that we had to work with. We're on a timeline and what I can say is that all of the design elements that were represented in scenario 2 and 3 are also present in one of the other scenarios. So if there are design elements that people specifically wanted to see us look at, we would like to hear that when we get to the discussion. So with that, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Stephen, and he is going to talk about where we're going. Stephen?
Thanks, Gina. And if you could just go to the next slide, it's the title slide, where we're going. And go ahead and proceed. Next slide. So just taking a reflection back to where kind of we all started with our effort, this is really trying to reveal opportunities to use and leverage the highway project to create the potential for restorative justice in a number of different scenarios. So our work is aimed at creating a lens through which to evaluate each of these options and to work with stakeholders and community to arrive at what they believe gives the best opportunity for that to happen. So obviously the concern is to support the Black community's desire for self-determination, absolutely. And then to, again, through the project, create the opportunity for local community to build it, to own it, and to benefit from it into the future. So with that, we'll just go forward a little bit and see what that looks like. Those are our three. Obviously, whether it's the EA base case or any of the options that come out of our efforts, there will be construction jobs created and other related jobs, contracting jobs for DBE firms that will benefit in the short term from the kind of wealth creation that happens there, and hopefully building their businesses to be competitive on larger scale projects going into the future, which gives some hope for longer term wealth creation, generational wealth creation, if you will. Next. Now to talk about what this kind of means to own it, of course, Olivia and our HR&A team has been diving into that rather deeply. So I'd like to turn it over to Olivia to talk about this part.
Thank you, Stephen, and really glad to be with everyone today to talk through this. So the slide that's shown here represents sort of a spectrum of ways that the community might sort of own elements of the highway cover project over time, starting with the Cover Development Commission, which we'll talk about in a moment, moving on to how the community will own the actual land or developable area created by the highway covers, how that area gets developed in item 3, and then how that area, especially open space, gets used in item 4. If you go to the next slide. Because this is a long process and one that will unfold over many years and require different capabilities and capacities of the governance entity and partners who work on this, we're going to dive in to just one piece of this that today we're calling the Cover Development Commission. But really, if you go to the next slide, this is a concept around the starting point for sort of community ownership and governance over the highway covers portion of the project and future development on the covers. It is the seed entity that would allow the community to take ownership of the decision making about how and where the highway covers are built, to work in partnership with other project partners who are moving the entire project forward to ensure that the highway covers outcomes are related to the community priorities, and also to start to build the capacities that will be necessary to develop those in the future. And so, we've thought of this as sort of a very early stage of the governance entity or structure. We're calling it the Cover Development Commission today, just to start. The name is not as important as the structure and what it's able to do, but starting it soon is quite important to enabling the community to have this ongoing ownership. So let's start to talk a little bit about what it would do. So we can go to the next slide, please. The first point is that this proposed commission would be formed by a binding agreement between parties independent of the current RQIP process to guide decision-making specifically around the highway covers. And this should be a legally binding agreement that is joined by representatives of government from the state level, regional level, local level, and including community stakeholders who will be part of these discussions and decision-making throughout the governance process, but whose voices are really important to have at this early stage, along with additional participants as needed. Go to the next slide. An effective commission like this would be independent of current RQIP, Rose Quarter Improvement Project committees and project processes, and should be representative of the community that's most impacted by the highway covers. We've had a lot of folks weigh in on what the highway covers should be and what the community's priorities are. A commission like this would be really focused on, in addition to the work that's happening on the project overall, would be focused on the community outcomes around the highway covers and the potential for future development on and around those covers. They would be part of decision-making around design, delivery, and ongoing use and management of the highway covers, and involved in developing a set of restorative justice goals specific to the highway covers and future development that could be met through the project as it unfolds, and would receive regular updates on progress toward these goals. Now, this is, a proposed approach, and as I mentioned, it doesn't, the name is not so much the important thing, as we feel that these elements of what would make up an effective start to the governance entity or governance structure are. This is not dissimilar from project working groups that have been created to steward projects with public and community partners forward, both in Portland and across the country as other large-scale infrastructure projects have been delivered, and would set this project off, meaning specifically the Highway Covers project, off on a strong footing that would involve community voices in really shaping how the highway covers themselves and the development on them unfurls in the future. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Stephen.
Great, thank you, Olivia. So we've just talked about how to own it, and thinking about what this project can deliver to the community into the future. We received or distilled from all of our engagement work 10 priorities, and those are documented on this slide and on the following slide, and they're consistent with the conversations we've been having about community control of development, of community opportunities for business ownership, for housing, for food sovereignty. If we go to the next slide, these notions of health and wellness, accessibility to gathering space, really marking this territory as a center for the culture of this community, the identity, so that all comes about through this process of this sort of governance entity, this community commission, if you will, that will continue this engagement process. So next slide, we're going to we've outlined some basic physical components that make up what we're calling the neighborhood framework. And that's intended to really create this canvas of land that will support the community priorities that we just talked about. So in this case, we've shown a lot of graphic information and talked a lot about the covers and the street networks and the kind of physical development. We've actually literally listening well to our stakeholder engagement meetings. We've taken a few steps backward to really try to represent this information in a more digestible, understandable way. So, we've reduced this to 3 major components. So we want to start with the existing connections, the north and south connections via Flint, Vancouver, and Williams, connecting up to the north and northeast neighborhoods where a lot of the Black community services still exist. And then also major east-west connections along Broadway and Widen. These will facilitate these goals and objectives. Next slide, please. Right. So the first major component is restoring and enhancing the street grid. We just talked a little bit about that. And we want to emphasize that these specific streets within the major connections, this potential to enhance those streets, Flint, Vancouver, Broadway, and Wilder, and then Hancock as a restored east-west connection, potentially. By reconnecting all of these streets, we're creating a better pedestrian, more bike-friendly series of street networks, and we're creating these edges, these potential for edges of commercial, retail, and other ground level uses that will be supported by a great streetscape and activated street frontages. So, thinking about all of the things that are in play right now, the Green Loop is another layer. We've been looking at ways to potentially connect the Green Loop along Broadway and or Wilder. It's just one other component. So if we go next. And the cover itself, so it's the second component is the cover, which stitches the land back together and adds this contiguous cover from the freeway below that has hopefully beneficial environmental impacts, as well as it creates the ground plane that all of these, all of the street networks are able to connect across, reconnecting areas that were severed originally by the highway. So, our goal here in the various scenarios we've developed is to maximize the kind of developable land area that's designated for community control and use. It's one of the obviously key findings from our work with stakeholders right now is control of the land.
Hey, Stephen, can I interrupt for just a second? Just note that the slides aren't progressing as you're talking. And I just encourage you to look at the slides and determine where you are in the slides and give some direction on where you'd like to be to facilitate your presentation.
I apologize. I'm actually referring to a parallel presentation thinking it was marching along at my rhythm, but my bad. Okay, so if you could go to the next slide, please. All right, so the cover, as I was saying, allows for that chasm that was created by the highway to be infilled and for the street networks now to cross over and reconnect. So that's obviously looking at a number of different ways to maximize the resulting land that's created by the cover and all of the adjacent parcels that may be used during construction for materials laydown, storage, and so forth, but at the end of the project will be no longer needed and can potentially be excess property that's given over to this community entity for control.
Again, Stephen, just I think you need to ask that the slides be advanced so that the slides can keep up with your presentation. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think you got one more you can advance, Amber. There you go.
Yeah.
That's where you wanted to be. Yeah.
That's right. So once the land is, obviously defined, then it's a question of what gets placed on it, what gets built on it. And this is where this community commission really comes in to make that determination. We have in the past shown the possibilities for where housing might go, retail, where cultural facilities would go. And we realized that, that formula is really going to be determined by the community. And we're creating the canvas on which all of these elements can be placed to create this ultimate, hopefully, work of beautiful art. Next slide. So to pivot to the power of place, we're going to ask Jerry from Milk to come in and really talk about the enhancement of real estate value, the enhancement of an address based on how it's proximate to open space and some other features. So Jerry, please.
Thanks, Stephen. It's super important, of course. Go back to the previous slide. Because we're striving for creating an address, strong addresses, we strive for maximum community benefit. And we see the before mentioned 10 community priorities as Stephen summarized them, not just as a wish list for the community, but also as something that is easily achievable. In fact, we're optimistic and we think that if we all work together, we can even exceed expectations. Ultimately, the goal is not to just restore an urban scar, the highway that bisects Portland, but also to heal an emotional scar and to restore a neighborhood into an optimized neighborhood for which our team will actively recommend governance policies for community-directed stewardship and ownership. But not just that, there's an enormous opportunity here, which has to happen now, which is to create a framework that sets the project up for the most optimal condition as it relates to quality of living, which includes, thanks to the cover initiative, good air quality, reduced traffic noise, but also lots of new land for community development with beautiful and safe community dedicated addresses with a good outdoor public realm that connects the neighborhood and provides spaces for activities and program and cultural events. Please go to the next slide. So let's talk about the open spaces prominently referenced in at least 3 of the 10 community aspirations, as you may have noticed. without talking about the fact that this is, as shown here by a few examples of our work, where the future design will create this vibrant layer of identity for this place that is also tailored to the community, of course, and Portland at large. An attractive place, a people place. But what it's going to look like, that's for later. Go please to the next slide. What we're going to do now is to focus on the framework, the best balance between built form, roads for traffic, and the public realm, which are the sidewalks where our children will play, and the parks and plazas where we will gather. Next slide, please. So I'm going to summarize the three scenarios that our team has studied. And just to help you navigate through our diagrams, they're all in the same style. Depicted in the light pink and the light green are placeholder buildings that we try to optimize in terms of their location as best as possible. Scenario one, of course, is the scenario where we have the current, so the base case, EA compliant traffic layout, including the southbound off-ramp and the northbound on-ramp off of Williams that you can see sneaking in behind those little pink buildings. The magenta indicates, let's say, projection upwards of where the cover is, and the pink buildings are on top of the cover, and the green is where we have terra firma. Next slide. Without indicating a design, we want to, let's say, have everybody understand that each of these options has implications for the quality and livability of the new neighborhood that we are creating. So in this case, we have to ask ourselves if the preservation of those on and off ramps is a good choice, right? You see already that we have to be very creative with the placement of our buildings, if that's at all possible. Nevertheless, next slide, please. We do see lots of merit in this sort of a dialogue between built form and the open space, right? That we, of course, will provide and design lots of possibilities for activities and program for, all dedicated to the people, all dedicated to the community and run by the community. Next slide, please. Scenario 4, next slide, please. Scenario 4 is, as you may recall, is based on a relocation of the on and off ramps, the southbound on ramp and the northbound, off ramp and the northbound on ramp, which opens up a lot of possibilities, right? We can really focus on optimizing the dialogue, the balance between built form and our open space. Next slide, please. This open space, of course, is also very much suitable to be programmed for activities and gathering and plazas where we can shop and provide playgrounds for. This is the option, the scheme with the large contiguous open space, let's say, a large, let's call it a town center, town square, town little Central Park, bordered by Flint, Broadway, Williams, and Hancock. And that's been made possible by that switch over from Vancouver to Flint. Next slide, please. Of course, very much, in the same line as the previous one, programmable with all kinds of activities. I like to point out that we don't just have more flexibility in terms of, let's say, what we do with our open space. It is also the relocation of the on and off ramps gives us the opportunity, for example, to create another anchor into the urban grid and pick up to that diagonal of Broadway leading to the bridge. Next slide, please. The final scenario, next, please, is basically the same road layout as option 1, however, with relocated on and off ramps, which again opens up lots of possibility for the placement and the functionality of our little urban precinct, the new community that we are creating here. Look at the street frontages that are created by careful placement of the buildings. Next slide, please. This is the scenario that we summarized by a neighborhood fabric, right? It's not a large open space, but more like a collection of connected, smaller open spaces, which also has merit, of course. Next slide, please. This is just the same scenario, but look, a view from another angle, not a bird's eye view. Lastly, next slide. You can see that although these spaces are also programmable, this scenario is basically very suitable for creating, like I already said, an urban fabric, a structure with streets, alleys, little plazas, pockets of green, and that kind of stuff. If that is something that we all decide is the best way forward. By the way, these options are, of course, not fixed in the sense that it's not a binary situation in the terms of, okay, you have this option or this, or I should say, it's not a trinary or ternary situation, right? We don't have to pick one of these three options. It's all very flexible. We think in terms of flexibility. We think in terms of feasibility. To pick the best parts of one option and use it in the other option, for example, still remains a possibility until the day we draw up our construction drawings. I like to say so. We just want to arrive to the most optimizable framework, and so I like to end with my word of the day: flexibility. Back to Stephen.
Great, thanks for that, Jerry. And that really does illustrate the possibilities. Can we go to the next slide, please? Right. So a lot of what we've been talking about is somewhat kind of theoretical and abstract from the sense of diagrams. We now really want to bring to you some notion of the look and feel of the neighborhood that we're talking about. There are going to be trade-offs between like maximizing the value of the real estate land, which could produce a community that's unfamiliar and undesirable in terms of scale and look, versus a qualitative decision the community might make to bring buildings to the area that are more in keeping with their sense of neighborhood scale and what brings about that sense of appropriateness for the community. So taking what we've been discussing with you in terms of features and priorities of the community and breathing some life into it, here we're looking south along Vancouver toward the Moda Center. You can see it in the center of this photograph. And so it's pretty much kind of no man's land right now. But given the potential of this development to produce this new developable land, if we go to the next slide, I'm going to ask that there's several pieces of this image that are animated, so I'll ask for a change and it'll introduce a new concept into the same frame. So I appreciate who's running the show. So this shows Vancouver, the same look. You can see the Moda Center again in the background in the center, but here we imagine new development taking place. Development that includes things like job training centers, for example, or the community culturally appropriate health center, other things that came out of our iterative process with stakeholders, things that they thought were desirable, office space, retail space. I want to bring your attention to the highway cover in the foreground between the bicycle and the ghosted-in car. And that line, that dashed pink line, represents going beyond it up to the point of the end of the diaspora building, the pink on the ground, the pink circle. That's area on the lid itself. And then the area behind it, where you see the kind of bluish building in the pink circle, represents development of a scale that could take place on firm land. So if you could hit the next slide button. Right. So this is what I was talking about. Businesses owned and managed by Portland's Black community. Hit it again, please. Right. And then in this option, these kind of nested green open spaces that Jerry was describing are sites where we've discussed before the potential for cultural identity being expressed in terms of events, activities, art. And so weaving these in so that they become a very integral part of the between the buildings and the uses in those buildings, these help to really bring value to those and work with them. Next, please. And as I was describing, the development that could happen on terra firma, as it's called, or firm land, is not restricted by the structure of the cover. So it could be taller, higher density, more square footage. And this again is where some value could really be created in the real estate. Next. This idea of a balanced street that supports not only multiple modes of transportation, i.e. bicycles, pedestrians, and vehicles, but also gives some of that frontage to cars for parking in support of those establishments that will locate themselves along, in this case, along Vancouver. Next. And finally, how we make the, how we widen sidewalks. And I showed an example over the course of our meetings of a place in Detroit where they widened that sidewalk and it really animated and enhanced the retail establishments that fronted on it, because you can sort of bleed activity out of the storefronts into the sidewalk area, and in combination with a landscape beautification, which serves not only to make the streetscape more pleasant for pedestrians and more beautiful for people in cars and buses, et cetera, it also serves an added purpose of stormwater management. So these are just examples to give you the look and feel of what the possibilities might be. So with that, we'll move on. And I'd like to turn this over to Kate White.
Thank you, Stephen. So you heard last week a lot of questions from the ODOT team on technical feasibility of the various designs, and we heard them as well, and we're in basically a daily dialogue on the cost, the timing, the technical review of the different scenarios, and what we can do with the design to best support, the community outcomes and the neighborhood vision that you just heard about. So if you go to the next slide, I will just quickly, I want to make sure there's time for discussion, but we are in the middle of QA/QC, which is quality control, in the circle in the middle there, going over all the items that you heard about last week. So making sure the mainline I-5 is functioning, there's not queuing, making sure the local street circulation, bike, ped, transit networks are working, safe intersections, that the intersections work, the signal functionality, the ramps, the different options, the geometrics work, vertical clearance, making sure the trucks can get under the covers, the structural issues. Stephen mentioned a little bit about what different highway cover structures can actually hold, whether it's two-story buildings or taller, and then property impacts. What is the right of way that's needed for the different scenarios. So we are going through all those. What I can tell you is so far we have not found any fatal flaws, meaning to the level of design that we're looking at, and the models, traffic models that we're looking at, and running, everything can work physically. So that's the good news. And then in terms of the environmental review pathways, I think it's pretty clear that there's going to have to be some type of additional environmental review, even with the base case kind of scenario one. But our goal is to keep that as limited as possible. So we're looking for pathways that can keep the project moving on schedule, on time, and cost effective. And so these are a couple different pathways that we are exploring to get the environmental review done that would be necessary. So one pathway down here on the bottom of the slide is there options to look at some of the elements that we're talking about, design elements, as mitigation? And so therefore, could they be studied through a very narrow environmental that wouldn't open up the whole project, the whole Rose Quarter Improvement Project, but just a narrow study? And similarly, another potential pathway is to look at, compare the different scenarios, and if our impacts of some of the scenarios we're exploring if our impacts are equal or less than the current environmental, then there probably would need to be certain technical studies to demonstrate that, but there's opportunities to not do, again, a full-blown EA review. So those are the different pathways that we're looking at right now. And we are nailing down the costs. I can tell you with the costs comparison, we are in the ballpark, which I'm glad to see. So far we don't see big cost differentials between the scenarios, but we'll be sharing all of that this week with ODOT, and we are going to bring that cost information and comparison into the work sessions 3, which start next week. And so we are, just in daily contact with ODOT to try to, make sure that our analysis is informing the RQIP evolution, and also that their feedback is informing our scenarios. So that is where we are. And, this will all go into our constructability and cost memo, which we're finalizing the draft, as well as the final report. With that, I think I'll turn back over to Gina.
Next slide, please, Amber. So we're ready to hear your comments and your feedback. If there are questions, we could start with that. We really would like to have your feedback about do you support establishing a new commission to oversee cover development and the the planning for cover development? And then secondly, we want to confirm that you agree with the proposed neighborhood framework that supports community priorities as a recommendation. So, and that framework includes major connecting arteries, reconnecting major streets, creating quality developable land, maximizing that, and a continuous cover, creating a continuous cover, I think were the 4 kind of elements of our framework, principles of our framework. And is that a good way for us to organize and to be used as criteria to evaluate the final scenarios and their value, in addition to cost and schedule and overall feasibility? So I could use a little help if there are hands.
I gotcha. I'm ready.
Questions. I see 2, Bryson and Keith, but I don't know who raised their hand first. So
Keith is number 1.
Bryson, I thought, raised his hand first. And there's somebody also in the chat that also wanted to speak.
Srinivasa.
Yes.
Absolutely. So Keith, we'll go to you
Bryson.
first.
Can we go to Bryson, please?
However you want to do it, Gina.
Yeah, if Keith's giving way, we'll go to Bryson first and then Keith, and then it looks like John's got his hand up. So,
well, we've got Srinivasa in the chat. So,
Yeah.
okay. So can we do Bryson first? Bryson, please.
So addressing your first question, do you support establishing a new commission? I definitely think that now is a good time to start forming that. But one thing I would recommend that we do in this process that I think, really it's something that I learned from the Williams and Russell project that could help make all of that development piece go more smoothly, have people feel better about the process and get things done more quickly, is to sit down beforehand and kind of map out where we think the project timeline is going to go, where the major decision points are going to be, so that when people join the commission, they can have a good organized template and view of where everything is going to go and what they should expect to be making decisions on. That way, there's not too much of people kind of spinning their wheels, going, "Well, I don't know what we're doing now. Well, what about this?" and not understanding where things are in the process. So getting all that organized first, and then I think, yeah, let's jump straight into it.
Thank you for your feedback and your advice on that. Keith, you were next.
Thank you, Gina. And Bryson, I really appreciate your comments as well. I heard several things in the presentation that concerned me, issues that I would like to bring forward and hopefully get some kind of thoughts from the others on. And that is the idea of a commission is I think for the development, I think is fine. I don't have a problem with that, but I think we should probably help give them some direction based on how others feel on this particular endeavor. I heard about other stakeholders. I don't know who those other stakeholders are, so I'd like to have some definition on that. I heard Black Cultural Center, and that pleased me because I understand the money aspect, and there's going to be folks that are going to make a lot of money on this, but this is not a reparations project. This is not something where every member of our community is going to benefit monetarily from. Everybody's not going to get a certain amount of acreage and a Rolls Royce. That ain't going to happen. I heard the term new land. This is not new land. This is replacement of land that was taken from us years ago. I think we need to be really clear about that. Also, I think that I would like to see free internet access for this particular area. Maybe that could be a prototype for for other areas of our city, so that our community can have free internet access when they go to this area. I would like to see interactive kiosks with local Black historical figures, and they would be vandalism proof, so that our history would never be lost. I would hope that that ODOT could support us and lobby and make sure that we got this area of land on the historical register, so it would always be there and never lost again. I would also hope that there was some language, and I know it's sometimes folks just think it's tomato, but I get concerned when people talk about a job training center. I've had many jobs in my lifetime, but I've only had one career. And I think we need to have a career training center so the folks can identify what careers that they want to pursue and have a pathway to be successful in getting to those careers and obtain those careers. So those are the things that I'm concerned about. And I think that, like I say, the dollars and cents, that's good. Somebody's going to make a lot of money. That's all well and good. But at the same time, what we need in our community, I believe, is a historical context so that we can have strategically placed kiosks in that area. We can have a Black Cultural Center in that area. And so that, future generations, when we're all dead and gone, future generations will be able to see who folks were in our community that made a difference in our community and understand that history. Because if we don't know our history, we're certainly not going to know where we're going forward. So that's my main concern, and I would hope others could weigh in on that. Thank you.
Thank you so much for all of your wonderful feedback, Keith. Very helpful and informative, and we will definitely take it to heart. I don't know who was next, whether it was Srinivasa or Nate next. Do you know?
It was Srinivasa and then John.
Oh, John. I'm
Yes.
sorry. Yeah, okay.
Okay, can you all hear me okay?
We can.
Awesome. First, I want to say that I 100% agree with and support everything that Mr. Edwards has shared. I also want to reiterate that he has shared some pretty consistent things. So I want to make sure that y'all are hearing those and taking notes around the Black Historical Center, the vandalism-proof kiosks for history and information sharing for future generations, as well as the career pathway training programs, not just job training centers. To add to that, a few things. One, just a process reflection or comment. I think it's really challenging to go a whole half hour of multiple different presentations and different topics and then share. I think in the future of having each section have a question and answer time before moving on to the next one would just be an easier way to have a conversation where it's less of a barrier for those of us who are listening to try and take copious amount of notes and remember which ones they correlate to. Having said that, regarding the idea of a commission, I'm curious about this. I have some concerns. I would definitely like to see a commission have responsibility and authority to the Black community and to have Black community members have the ultimate leadership and power. What I heard and what I saw in there was a lot of government agencies coming together with a few community representatives. And to me, this is not the same thing. I'm curious about how a Black CDC could be different from other CDC models. And again, I think it comes down to accountability, decision-making power, and who has ultimate authority. So I think all of those things would need to be first crystal clear before I would be in favor or at least support one decision or one model or the other. My last thing is about the career trainings. And so we've seen a lot of slides about construction pathways. We know for a fact that this project has the potential of creating all sorts of wealth that could be generational wealth, depending on how it's invested, and job exposure opportunities that could turn into long-term career paths, depending on how it's designed. So ultimately, at the end of the day, I'm wondering, because I've heard representatives from ODOT talk so much about this timeline and sticking with the timeline, and let's make sure we stay with the timeline, that can be a very kind of toxic carryover from white decision-making and white supremacy culture of needing to push forward on a set timeline versus being intentional about why we're taking a pause and why we're shifting the timeline when it makes sense. So I just want to push back on ODOT and also encourage HAAB, us as collective members, to reevaluate the need to stick to a timeline when there is tension around decisions, and if we need to advocate for more time, that we do that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pranavasa. And I'm sure Olivia could speak to a couple of your points, but we have so many people that have comments and want to weigh in that I would just like to keep moving and make sure we hear from everybody who wants to give us some feedback. I think that's what we welcome at this point. So I think it's Mr. Washington, isn't it? Isn't it John next? John?
She happened to say everything that I was thinking, so I don't need to duplicate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Nate, I think, was next. Is that correct? Dr.
We actually had, right before Nate, Sharon Gary Smith had put hers in the chat that she wanted to articulate something. So we write to Sharon and then to Nate from there.
Okay, thank you for your help.
Absolutely.
Sharon, please.
I'm assuming that's based on stacking age in order. I just want to bring it up to your attention. I'm not fooled, but I'm thankful. I want to really thank first Keith and then certainly Srinivasa. So I don't need to reiterate, as John just said, a lot of what they said. But as I was writing and noting this, I really appreciate the question, not for me, of whether or not a commission, because if it's governance and ownership, that matters to me beyond this moment, but particularly the emphasis she placed on how does that happen different than the history that is as recent as now. It's historical and now, with how the decisions around ownership and governance and who gets to sit and who gets to hear. And so I think that's a major piece for us to work on, not just intention, but with intention for me, so that it's different and that it's functional and that it arrives at the decisions that we would want it to arrive at. But more importantly is that as I heard the presentations, and I really appreciated Stephen laying out possibilities and transformation, when I heard land connections and community, I wrote down built in open spaces, community culture and living space, ownership and governance. I immediately thought, well, maybe they can answer the question. Every bit of that I've been hearing for several years under the Albina Vision Trust. And I want to know that that layout of community and spaces that are open and multi-generational and, history that is marked and is interactive, that's all absolutely what I've been seeing and hearing. Is this in fact the collaboration between the vision for our land that was the land, and certainly one of us, it's not new land, rather Keith. Is that where that's coming from? So this is the Albina vision that is intertwined with this. I'd love to hear that or have it named, because that would be a particular question and issue that is drifting around that would help me be able to actually see this as a collaborative, intentional community effort, because everything spelled out, even the picturing of it, was so familiar to me immediately. And I think that would be important for us to know that community beyond us, in fact, as well.
So I'd just like to let Olivia make a quick couple of comments, because there's been several comments around governance, and I want her to speak to what our thinking is that may not have been clearly communicated in the slide. So Olivia, if you could just answer Sharon's question about AVT and how the collaboration, whether this is there's a relationship there, and also speak to the other concerns about who is managing, controlling, and guiding any commission that we would constitute, that would be constituted by the ESC's recommendation on this.
Yeah. Thank you, Gina. Thank you so much for making time for this response. And thank you everyone for these comments. I want to start just by saying, Srinivasa, your comments really highlighted to me that I left something very important out of how we describe this proposed or potential commission. And I appreciate everyone adding on or echoing that comment, which is that we envision both the commission and a CDC or whatever entity is stewarding the development on the highway covers to be Black owned and Black led, and certainly accountable to the historic Albina Black community. The involvement of government stakeholders in that agreement that would be used to form the commission would in fact be used to keep those partners accountable for their roles in working with the commission, and for turning to the commission as a major stakeholder and decision maker in the process about what happens with the highway covers and what is developed on them. So I just want that to be very clear. In terms of the potential role for a group like AVT, I think you noted that we had other stakeholders, and I think Mr. Edwards, you asked about this, sort of who are some of those other stakeholders that we listed there. I think that a group like AVT could bring, some capacity or capabilities to the commission that could be useful in helping them to develop the capacity to move from planning and construction to future development on the highway covers. There may be other community organizations or representatives of organizations that you would want to be involved to fulfill sort of those different capabilities that are needed to steward the group over time. I hope that starts to answer the questions. I know there's a lot more we could talk about there, but I'll keep it brief for now.
I think there would be collaboration, Sharon, between AVT and the commission for sure, because they're really working on the same agenda. And they're working on the same agenda in the same area. So AVT might be on the, I mean, they may have representation on the commission, right? For example. But I certainly see that the possibility of collaboration between those community stakeholders. Absolutely. So
Nate is next.
Nate.
Yeah, thank you. And so appreciate being in this conversation today with all the folks on the ESC and the HAAB. As another Black person in the community, I agree with a lot of the comments said already on record. I think the one thing that I would want to make sure with the commission, and that in our personal opinion at NAMAC as a contractor association, is that it would be separate than this highway project so that we don't lose momentum and timing around where we are, since this was passed in 2017 and we're in 2021. That would be, my hope and goal. I think if the community wants to speak up about that, that would be great. I would include on the commission some re-education maybe, or additional education on how wealth generation is created, not only in America, but how it started in Oregon, being that Black folks came here, maybe not exclusively, but majority Black folks came here for a job. They didn't come here because Oregon felt like a destination for Black people. They came to work. And I think that construction has been the backbone of our economy, regardless of anything that we say in these meetings. And we need to figure out how we get young people these jobs. And so I just would hope that this commission could be, all encompassing as far as coming up with a strategic plan. We talked about that last week, and I think we failed when we talked about what it means to generate wealth and what it means for these projects and what it means to develop. And all of those things need to happen. But I think we need to be very serious that we do have a schedule. And I think we have some hungry young people in the community who really want to get to work. And so I just wanted to put that out there, but agree with a lot of the sentiments already today.
Thank you, Nate, so much for your comments.
Leslie?
Leslie?
Yes, I'm here. So what I have to say probably is not going to be as popular as what some other folks said. I guess my question is, my statement is that there are 5 or 6 committees, commissions, oversight groups that are already operating in and around Northeast Portland to the benefit of the Black community. So yet another committee, it seems like, for me, an effort in, why are we again separating off and trying to create something new as opposed to looking at what's already being done, where you have housing, where you have economic development, where you have all of these other pieces already at a table. Because I keep coming back to the question, where is the money coming from to pay for all of these wonderful things that have been proposed? The ODOT has money to pay for the covers, and that's it. They don't have money for historical things or for kiosks or all of these other things. And where's that money going to come from? Is a CDC going to raise those dollars? How is that going to happen? I'm not opposed to any of those things happening. I just feel like the expectations of what is going to come out of this process are all the way, they're as tall as the Empire State Building, and we have enough money to get to, street level. And so that continues to be my concern every single meeting, where we hear about all of these great things that could go on these covers, and there's no money to pay for anything except for the covers. So I'm just still questioning all of this circling we have done around the potential without any real guidance as to how those things are going to happen. And now we're going to form another group of Black folks, or mostly Black folks, to sit at a table to make a determination about what should go there, and then they got to find the money to pay for it.
Well, hopefully part of the whatever kind of an agreement, and Olivia, you can chime in, would be that people are committing to playing a role in helping to bring forward some of this vision and to provide resources for bringing forward of some of this vision. That's the point of an agreement with other stakeholders and partners, which could include foundations, could include city government, could include, Metro, could include private parties, could include the Federal Highway Administration. Quite frankly, if this project was restorative enough to warrant some of the new kind of funding that's being considered at that level. So there are options, but part of the steering committee's job, or the commission's job, is to really start planning this out and figuring out where those dollars come, because they can't really do anything, can't do any development on that land until the canvas is built. So you got a 7-year period of time where this group can begin to strategically plan and create that timeline that Bryson's talking about, and to create a plan, a capital plan for what comes first and where that development starts, and so forth. So Olivia, is there anything else that you would add to that?
I think you really covered it, Gina. I mean, I would just reiterate that, the reason we've started exploring this commission is a recognition that there really needs to be sort of a focus on the highway covers and what happens to the highway covers as this area is delivered. And if possible, separate from sort of everything about the project, which is so huge and long-term in and of itself, that we think the highway covers and their ability to deliver on some of the community priorities and certainly on some of the restorative justice goals are deserving of, their own focus and their own working group that will change in a different way than I think oversight of the full project would, right? This needs to be a group that can start to set up entities that will remain with the highway covers and oversee development on the highway covers and own development on the highway covers over the long term. So it's quite a different role, I think.
I want to get to a couple of more comments. I think President Peterson's had her hand up for a while. So
if I can jump in real quickly, Dr. Amato, you had your hand up and then you took it down.
Thank you, Dr. Holt. I actually stated it in the chat. I just was concerned about yet another group, but other people have expressed that same. So I just stated it there, and that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, President Peterson.
I'll defer to Marlon. Marlon had his hand up and then took it down.
Yeah, I don't want to just continue a long conversation. I just want to echo what Mr. McCoy said earlier. We need to get these young people working. For those of you who don't know, I daylight as a school teacher, and I've been working with youth in the alternative school program for several years, and I've recently switched. And it's traumatizing for me to turn on the TV or read the paper or get a social media post about another one of my former students either dead or going to prison. It doesn't stop, and we need to get these kids working. I just told like 3 of them to go apply for this apprenticeship that's starting in another month or so, because I know what they're doing on the daily to survive. They don't have an option right now. They don't have jobs. Their parents don't have jobs. They're doing whatever they can to survive, and it's not safe. It's not safe for them. It's not safe for their community members. It's not safe for their family. This is something that can help us, and we're prolonging this for what? I don't know. I don't want to see any more posts about another one of my kids gone. Just, we need to move forward.
Thank you. Appreciate those comments. President Peterson?
Yeah, I just thank you for sharing, Merlin. That was helpful. And I just want to say thank you for all that you do. That's hard. So hard to go back to the two questions on the table, but the first one on a commission, I think that we need to definitely put together some sort of group that takes the piece that this group isn't actually working on, right? So ODOT's mission is to build a project. They asked us to help figure out how to maximize the amount of space for the programming of the community in the future and maximize the opportunities so that no opportunities were foreclosed without at least thinking about it. So I think that's our mission, but how it's programmed in the future as we march into the future past this project really needs to be the purview of another committee. And I think that's really important. And it needs to be owned for the long term. I agree with a lot of the comments made. We don't want to create another committee just for committee's sake. So there has to be ownership in the Black community of the outcomes. And obviously the Metro will want to help and be a partner alongside, but not, and we're going to run to keep up with you as fast as we can to make sure that we're maximizing all of the public investment that we can bring to the table as we move forward into the future. So I look forward to that conversation, but I think that what I can say now is Metro would be your partner to this committee, and we can make that commitment now. The second question, I'm trying to remember exactly what it was. Oh, it was obviously taking the neighbors and community interests and start putting it into, I guess, a hybrid conversation. So I guess I just want to say we are very interested in keeping this conversation moving and integrating as much of this input as we can into the next stage of the hybrid. And we want to do that with efficiency, but we also want to do it by pushing the boundaries a little bit of what is possible in both the design and restorative justice. So I think we can do this. I think we can have a win-win on meeting expectations on how we get short-term as well as long-term gains from this project. And I guess I just have a quick question to kind of wrap this up, and that's how do we envision our next steps in developing the recommendation from the HAAB and the ESC? And I'm hoping it's combined because I really like this format. I like hearing all the voices that I'm hearing. It's very helpful. And yeah, so how do we get to that hybrid conversation and make that hybrid recommendation to the OTC? What do we do next?
Charles or Nolan, do you want to speak to that? Nolan?
I was gonna suggest that Charles receive that question.
Okay, that's fine. Charles?
I think there is if I understand your question right, I think there is cause for optimism, and finding a way to share a common vision is going to help the process move forward in the EA process. And drilling back from that, it's going to help bring stakeholders who will be partners to build this neighborhood. So I think we're seeing that light and we're walking toward it, and we're trying to light on this project in that way. President Peterson, I agree with your assessment that we can push the boundaries here because this is a very important project for the region.
So I'll just add to that by saying, obviously there's a little less time to explore all of the configurations than we'd like. So what would be most helpful to us is if there are particular elements that stand out most to you that you'd like to see in concepts that form the final recommendation. We need to hear that.
Call it out.
Because ultimately what we're going to be working to do is maximize the number of community identified priorities that get into that final recommendation. And I think Gina's mentioned this, but at the end of the day, we're not supposed to be coming up with the ideas and recommendation. We're supposed to be hearing what y'all are saying and what we've heard in these workshops, and then synthesizing, okay, here's an idea that you all feel is representative of these conversations and that you can advance as a recommendation. So If we don't hear it from you, it's hard for us to get it into a recommendation or a hybrid or any of those things. And then if you do, then we're trying to assemble those things in a way that feels harmonious.
So I guess just in terms of a follow-up, and I guess it's more to our two group members, how best do we provide that input? Because I feel like it needs to be facilitated in terms of the elements that you even put into these. We had a quick overview, and I was very appreciative of the second overview. But how do we distill down the key elements and kind of get some input on all of those? Is that where we're gonna have a next round of conversation, or?
Yeah, I think that's for work session 3. We're hoping we can facilitate that with HAAB, the ESC, and with the community members who've been committed to this process. And I think we can get a lot of pretty good information and some direction. And then ultimately, we'll put that together. And, I think that one facilitation idea we might consider is having the subcommittee of the ICA meet in the middle of June, just to kind of take stock of what is seeming like a good idea, that we can bring forward, or you can bring forward. That subcommittee can bring forward to the HAAB and the ESC to give consideration for what are the priorities that seem balanced against the challenges. And then use that as a basis and a template for everyone meeting in June, the end of June, to really confirm some of those elements, or at least the elements that you think should go forward no matter what, and then those elements that you perhaps want to study more. And then go to the OTC with that in hand, with some direction on how you think the recommendation should be set in public. So I think we have time here. As Nolan said, we can be optimistic, and coming together and looking for those things are going to be crucial to meeting this tight timeline.
And I think we will, President Peterson, I think we will have an opportunity to talk about specific elements as, within each of the design concepts, and what else you would like to see us in our work session 3. So that could be the first blush if you don't have something that you want to speak to today. That could be a place where we could capture that and move that forward in the way that Charles just described. So, our work sessions are imminent at this point. Our work session with HAAB is next week on this Tuesday, and then the following Monday is our work session with the ESC. So we're gonna, we're working to bring all of that together so you will be able to deliberate and speak to that kind of putting things together from the pieces.
Thank you very much. We are at our time in order to move to the next section so we can have our discussion or continue on in a discussion. Great conversations. We do have 2 other hands raised. We will honor those and then we will move forward. So Keith Edwards from the HAAB, and then right after Nate McCoy.
Thank you, Dr. Holt. I think, and if you've seen the chat, that we're concerned about having concrete language. I know we're just advisory, but if you've been listening, then you know that we're concerned about concrete direction, concrete goals, and concrete plans. ODOT is not going to start this project without blueprints. We don't have a blueprint. We want to see a blueprint, and we want that blueprint to be finalized so that we know exactly what we're getting here. Because otherwise we know that oftentimes it goes into the back room and it gets changed out and it's something totally different than what the community had for expectations. So I think we need to be real clear about that. We can't have a drawing on a napkin. We want a blueprint of what this is going to turn out, what it's going to be at the end of the day.
Thanks, sir. Appreciate that.
Dr. Holt, I wonder, I know we're tight on time, but if I could use just 45 seconds, I want to make clear though, that our team will be providing a conceptual approach to the highway covers. And we will, to the best of our ability, tell you what can be built on those, but I just want to make sure we don't overpromise about what our scope is in this study, what happens on those and under what scenario with what money. We can tell you what we think is possible, which is what the reason our thing is called an assessment. But I just want to make clear that we do not have the scope or time to, actually work out the buildings and what's in the buildings and who owns it and all those things.
Thank you very much. But so to your statement, Mr. Edwards, that is very much part of the ongoing strategy to leave nothing in the air. So I've got Nate, and then we've got Chair Simpson, and then Megan also. And John, I see your hand. We're going to have a portion of discussion that really is open to continued robust engagement. So Nate.
Yep, just quick comments. I'm just wondering, we talked about how 54 people were interviewed in the community, which clearly doesn't make up the full Black community. But I'm thinking, I wonder if there's other reference documents that I might not know or the ESC and HAAB might not know about that are being considered as part of this. And what I go to very specifically is the Economic Development Plan for PCRI, the Pathway 1000. If folks don't know that document, that pretty much lives and breathes what I think most in the Black community, who over 200 people weighed in on that document, including Urban League, and Prosper Portland has a document. I mean, there's a lot of documents where, as Leslie said, we don't need to keep reinventing the wheel. And I would love for those documents to be reference points spotted out so community folks can read for themselves which are the paths forward in these discussions. So I just wanted to kind of table that, because there's a lot of stuff that we could cite to without having a whole lot of other, commission meetings and folks who don't know what they don't know, weighing in on things that could impact them negatively. So I'll leave it at that, but thank you, Steve.
Thank you. Chair Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Holt. Man, that was a lot. That was good. And I appreciate all those genuine comments and points people made and questions and concerns. I think real quick, I was actually doing some numbers earlier just on the presentation, and kind of now that Nate just said that, but before, because what I want to do is I'm going to go back to everybody's comments individually, because I think the important question on the table is the question regarding this commission. But the 43% of the visitors for the online open house were not from the community, nor did they live in the community. And less than 40% of them were people of color. Less than 40%. So when we talk about, Mr. Edwards brought up minority and majority, I actually shared my sentiments about the term minority to somebody who provided a public comment a few weeks ago, where I was always taught by my mentors, Black mentors, that you should never consider yourself a minority, because minority means less than. And that is how I've been raised, and that is what I believe. I'm not less than anything, and I'm not less than anyone. I'm a majority myself, and my people are a majority. The workshop and the online interviews had a total of 137 individuals. 43 from the workshop were Black, 22 were Black from the online, which equates to 65% total Black people. So that means 47%, which is less than 50% of our community, is making these recommendations.
Not really.
How did that come to be? So that's the first thing that kind of gets me a little, those are data points Those are points that were in the presentation. Everybody can go check that out themselves. As I go back through and I look at the commission, I think the commission is actually a good idea. The problem is that it's not going to be capable of running congruently with this established body. If somebody could put up the slide of the commission and we actually look at who is supposed to be represented on that commission, which I believe somebody brought to light in terms of why should this be a commission that is comprised of primarily public officials. That's a really important question, and I think it should be answered by the Black community. Because if you were to look at this group right here, in full transparency to this body, because I'm not going to lie to my people, we've already worked on a group like this. And guess what happened? It fell apart. And so my question and my concern about a commission is, if we stand up a commission, who's going to ensure that that commission is not going to fall apart? That's the first question. So I think we should probably start asking a lot of questions as, what does that mean? Who was on this commission? Who were having these conversations in regards to this project? Mr. Edwards had indicated that this is not a reparations project. Then I'm not sure what it is we're going to call it, because I feel like there's a lot of people, unless there's a lot of misinformation going out there in terms of this theory of restorative justice. And I think on the last call I mentioned restorative justice, reparations, reconciliation, all the R terms. Then what are we talking about? I don't think, I agree, not everybody's going to get Bentleys and fancy coats, but the reality is the reparations and restoration should be the ability for us to restore the ability for Black community to work cohesively together. And that has to be the moral compass that we are led by, not financial gain, but holistically, like positive change internally as a people. Let's see, Career Training Center. I thought that was a really good phrase that you brought up, because Workforce Training Center obviously kind of insinuates you're on there's a hierarchy, right? But career obviously gives you a bigger purview in terms of what your aspirations are and how do you obtain your goals in the end as an individual pursuing a career that could obviously help their family. Someone will make a lot of money, you indicated. And I think at my last call, I told you guys, I said, this is about money. The question is, who's going to make all that money, Mr. Edwards? Of course, someone's going to make a lot of money. This is prime real estate, probably trading at $300 a foot. Who's going to make a lot of money on this? Is it going to be the community? Is it going to be Black developers? Or is it going to be the same old individuals who've been making all the money on these massive developments in the Portland metro region for years? I am having a hard time pronouncing her name, so I know what it's like because I get it all the time, but Sabrina Vasa. I agree. She had indicated that we should probably have more Q&A through the presentations. I think that's a definitely good recommendation. Commission concerns, Black-led, not by government. Again, that is a really, really, really good point. But again, all that to say is you can't have a genuine Black output unless you have the Black community working together collectively on their concerns and their issues and what's necessary to move their community forward. And it can't be governed by the majority groups or institutions. So that right there opens up a conversation as, well, who are the people that need to be sitting around the table and helping come up with these scenarios that are going to lead to these outcomes that are going to actually foster real benefit of the Black community. And the whole timeline kind of like forcing and being kind of indication of white supremacy, I get that. And I respect that perspective, but I think at the end of the day, you still have to have boundaries in terms of what you're doing. Otherwise, as everybody's articulated, you can stand up every committee you want. You know, you'll just be sitting here talking for years and nothing will ever get done. And so at the end of the day, we have to create some kind of framework and boundary so that we can get to the outcomes we know we need and our people need in our community. Sharon had indicated ownership and governance should be determined now. I agree. But again, as I talked about earlier, there's been this conversation of the commission. The problem is these individuals voluntarily walked away. And so how do we get them back to a place where they can talk more holistically about what goes into urban development? Because again, this is a highway project. This is infrastructure. Yes, there's a cap involved, but the cap has to be engineered to be able to support whatever it is the community decides in correlation and coordination with the city, with Monoma County, with Metro, and even more importantly, ABT, because it is a great vision. And that kind of ties into the other thing that Sharon brought up as it relates to ABT and other stakeholders being involved. Nate indicated commission should be separate from project. I agree, but obviously there should be some cross coordination in terms of like a handoff to make something like this actually work. Leslie, thank you for saying that. Again, as I said, financial conversations are very sensitive topics because no one wants to talk about money. In a capitalistic society, you have to talk about money because money determines who wins and who unfortunately loses. So yes, adding another commission and committee is redundant. Why recreate the wheel? We already have them. Nate just talked about Pathways 1000. Where's the money going to come from? Again, those are those other public agencies that have to be able to determine what's in their pockets and they want to put on the table. And yes, ODOT's not going to be able to pay for this development utopia. That's just not practical unless somebody else has something else, some other information that I don't know about. Yeah, I agree with that, Leslie. Ebony indicated another group is unnecessary. Marlon, thank you for actually bringing to light once again what's going on in our streets. Our Black youth are dying and killing each other, and it's not a laughable matter. But when you think about it in the context of tomorrow being a 1-year anniversary from the death of George Floyd, which was public genocide, we're actually experiencing Black genocide in our community right now. No one's talking about it. We want to talk about, you know, buildings on caps, but the reality is and who's going to own that and who's going to control that? No, we need to be talking about what our people need and get our people off the streets with nothing to do, so they can actually start understanding that there's a bigger agenda going on here that they need to stand up against, because I know I can't stand for Black genocide, and I don't think anybody else should stand for it. Lynn's points are very good. Creating a group that's working hard. And we should look at a hybrid option. I think the short-term and long-term gains, what are the next steps and how do we get there? Those are all questions that have to be answered. But again, there's too many bodies and too many groups. And so if there is a stood up commission, great, that all sounds good. But the reality is it's probably not going to be, is it going to be this body? Is it going to be the body that was originally stood up? Is it going to be some new body? Who's got time? How does that work parallel with all the other groups and all the other agendas that have been set out in place for the Black community over the years? Those are really important. Nolan had mentioned, you know, are there options ESC have like to prop up? I think these are the things that we should be talking about right now as the group. So I don't want to keep eating up too much clock. Keith, your point about having a blueprint is 100% spot on. We can talk pie in the sky in theory, but if we don't have something concrete, how are we really going to know what it is we're actually signing up for, right? And so that right there is a testament to obviously just being conscious and aware of what's really going on, and obviously more importantly, knowing what's happened to our community over the years. I think everybody here would probably agree that we should probably not allow what's happened historically to happen again, especially with this opportunity in front of us. But the opportunity is not a big development. The opportunity is how do we bring the Black community together to work cohesively, speak from one voice, speak from one tone, so we can ensure that we're making the investments for the next generation. Those are my comments, Dr. Holt.
Thank you, Chair. And let me say this, I'm sure there are people who want to respond to the chair. I'm sure there are a host of thoughts, and I appreciate that. And I certainly don't want to quell that capacity. However, we've got 33 minutes left in our meeting. And so there's a whole section of conversation for us to engage in. Many of the themes have been indicated, and we will address them. This speaks to the need of this community. This speaks to the need of us being in this space. I think the HAAB and the ESC having an ongoing connection and connectivity in this space just makes sense. It is a suggestion. And of course, bringing in the COAC where beneficial and possible would just be a good strategy for our work, to make sure that we're having transparent decision-making, to make sure that we are elevating the voices of the community, to make sure that we are talking restorative justice, to make sure that we're thinking about the win-win scenario. How do we create the space to make sure that there is the best optimized possibility that we heard to leverage this opportunity? And I appreciate the ICA's responsiveness to the idea of a hybrid, and to make sure that what they're saying is, you tell us, you bring the information so that we can hear it clearly and then be responsive to what you're saying as we're being thoughtful about how to create the best possible scenario. So that's our ongoing work. That's what we'll be talking about. And Megan, I know that you've got some specifics to help us with. So, Megan.
Thank you, Dr. Holt, and thank you, Chair Simpson, for your comments as well. And thank you to our HAAB and ESC members for this dialogue today. I just want to note that we hear you. I think a consistent theme here is just making sure that we're taking the time to get it right. And I want you to know that we're prepared to take that time to get it right. We want to make sure that the community has really the ample time for this decision. So I want you to know that we are in the spirit of this hybrid option, really working on a plan for that timeline, including consideration of some additional time for the cover recommendation. We'll work with the ICE team on those next steps. And we really do believe that there is a way to do that also keeps the overall project construction timeline on track, while also infusing greater community conversations into this decision point. So more to come. I definitely don't have all of the answers tonight, but want you to know that we are going to be looking at an approach that helps build in that broader community conversation.
Thanks, Megan. I see that Bryson also has his hand up.
Yeah, I just had, because I heard a couple of different times. I had a clarifying question for Olivia on the commission piece. So in your concept of the commission, I know in the Williams and Russell project we had several different government and institutional stakeholders that were at the table: the Housing Bureau, Prosper Portland, Mayor's Office, and if you listed it out of a list of those things, it looked like the group of officials and institutional participants was significantly longer than the community members who were actually making the decisions. But when we got down to the actual forming the group, we ended up with about 15 to 20 community members who were the only voting members, and then all of those institutional people were advisory members. But there was a memorandum of understanding that all the groups agreed to kind of follow in terms of the direction of the project. And I'm just want to clarify to make sure that that's kind of what because it looks like that's what you're proposing. I just want to make sure that I'm tracking that.
I'll respond very briefly. Thanks, Gina. Bryson, that's exactly correct. The structure that we intended for the commission or a proposed entity like that is for government stakeholders to enter into a binding agreement so that all stakeholders on the commission are accountable for the work of the commission being done, and so that those government entities can provide resources for that work to be done, whether that's in staff time, it will need to be in budget for the commission, et cetera. But that the decision-making power within the commission would sit with the community stakeholders and other stakeholders, like we talked about, who would be sort of the members, or as you said, like in that case, the voting members. Thank you for the question and clarification.
I apologize about that. My computer froze. And so thanks, Erica, for jumping in. I appreciate that very much. We have
Dr. Holt, real quick.
Go ahead.
Olivia's point, I would just, one question, because that makes total sense. The question I have is, usually in these forums of these groups, and not the same thing related to but how would you define, or how would you determine like a chair for that group? How would you determine like the structure of that to even function? That was just my question about that.
So if I could, there's lots of different ways that could occur. And if people in this group have opinions about it, this is the kind of feedback we're looking for right now.
Yeah. We're open to feedback.
I think, just to put out some ideas, for instance, there could be a nominating committee that is charged with selecting or reviewing applicants to the commission. they could also make decisions about sort of the organization of that commission, which could definitely be informed by this group. There could be an application and review process, by existing stakeholders from this group, et cetera. I think I'm getting some background noise, sorry. But there could be a number of ways to sort of nominate and charge people with different roles on the committee.
Well, thank you very much. I'm going to segue from the ICA at this moment and say thank you for your time and your efforts and your energy tonight. I know there's always something to say and something else to add, but I'm going to ask us to hold it, please.
I just want to say thank you, Dr. Holt, to everybody for their comments. We appreciate it. And, we welcome further feedback to help us as we move into this final stage to refine, the choices for
thank you very much.
Bodies to deliver. So thanks
for the work. You bet. And great conversation tonight. I will reiterate what I was beginning to communicate. This is a great indication of how necessary it is for us to come into this space and for us to do the work that we're doing. And one of the things that's important is that there's responsiveness to what's being heard. And in the conversation of what's being heard, part of what stood out is two elements. One is the win-win scenario. What is necessary to create a win-win for the community, and then what restorative justice begins to look like. Now, I almost hesitate to open that can of worms, considering we've got the time that we have left. Obviously, we're not going to get through all of the conversation tonight, but there were several members I know who were very concerned about and interested in talking about what restorative justice looks like, as well as what a win-win looks like for the community. And I think the hybrid model that's been indicated is what will aid in that. So let me create some space, and we've got about 20 minutes for a conversation. We'd love to hear from committee members related to those two items, win-win scenario, and your thoughts about restorative justice, or you can continue to speak in regard to the hybrid model. So who would like to weigh in first? Bryson.
Yeah, so I'll start with the restorative justice piece. I mean, I think there's kind of a couple elements. The first is economic opportunities for people doing the work to build the entirety of the project. So that includes people working on the mainline transportation piece. That includes people working on the auxiliary pieces. That includes the people who will work on whatever gets determined to be the development, making sure that those dollars go as best they can to members of this community, so that they can prosper from those opportunities. That's the first piece. The second piece is that we maximize the ability to create developments that can have long-lasting impacts in the community for years and decades to come. You think about having, the benefits of getting a contractor are great, but the benefits of having housing, homeownership opportunity is huge in terms of long-term wealth creation. The benefits of having a well-priced place to put your business in a very vibrant and heavily trafficked section of the city can set people up for long-term wealth creation, things like that. And so maximizing that sort of potential when it comes to the development piece. And then, one of the big pieces and why, this project is the focus point for this is the history of the interstate is that it ran right through the neighborhood and bisected it in a way that really lost that connection, but from one side to the other. And I think as best we can, restoring that connection so that you get more of a continuous neighborhood community feel among the various components is going to be important. You think about things like walkability and being able to transfer from place to place on foot or by car or whatever. So I think those are the main pieces that come to the restoration component of this project. And then I think when it comes to the other piece of your question, I think the main thing to keep in mind is I approach being on this ESC as we've got this project, this frame that we're looking at, and we've got a structure of resources that are made available to make this project happen. And the question that we're trying to answer is how best should ODOT approach the project in order to maximize all of the stuff I just listed as far as the restorative justice components. And I think in order to answer that question, we need to really look at all of the various components that are really in the realm of possibility for this project, in order to be able to weigh the different pieces, and in order to say that our recommendation is the best when it comes to maximizing the components that we care most about.
Thanks, Bryson. I appreciate those comments. John Washington, and right after John, Keith, just jump in.
Good afternoon, everyone. I've been listening, and I've been listening real intently into a lot of things that have been said here. And, win-win, whenever I think about that sort of statement or that phrase, win-win, and then I try to associate it with restorative justice. And, whenever I hear that sound or those words put together, restorative justice, it's almost as if there was ever some justice, that there was justice ever before this. It implies as if we had found some place once before, and now we're trying to get back there. And it ain't never been no stable ground nowhere in this equation. So just still to figure out what that's all about when you think about restorative justice. But to me, at this point in time, I find that I vacillate back and forth between two places: anger and the idea that there may be a possibility to get past that, to get to some place where I begin to recognize that I matter, that I have some value, that I'm significant as a human being. Number one, I went to school on a Paul Robeson scholarship. And Paul Robeson, he left this country to go to Russia to sing opera. And he stated in some of his soliloquies and some of the things he stated that he had to go all the way to Russia to be able to feel like a man, to feel like a human being, to experience what that was, So when I think about what's restorative justice, and I think about capitalism, I think about, of course, reparations, but that implies that I was a victim somewhere in all of this. And so therefore someone, and people always ask me, well, what does reparations look like to you, John? Well, I always say that if every white person go to the bank each morning, they wake up and put $200 in 20s in their pocket, and every time they saw a black person, they just walked up and handed them $20 and say they're sorry for their history, that maybe perhaps there could be some equity in all of this. We can maybe bridge that gap between us, the ones that have and the ones that have not. we exist in a realm where we never started out equally. We never started out that way. So how do we get to equal? Or how do we even begin to get to a place to where we can compete, where we got households in the Black community that makes $33,000 a year and white ones make $90,000 a year? How do we begin? But if I drill it down to just this project, right? And I think about how do we begin to just figure out, you know, some of these things. Well, some of these things mean, as I said, I have to come here with a basic consciousness, a consciousness of willing participation, the willingness to want to somehow or another arrive to some healthy place, you know, that desire to do that. And it's a very difficult place. So, but anyway, in the attempt to do that today, I believe that, as it was said earlier, that there are plans. You know, there have been plans. The Soul District has been having a plan for the last 10 years for our district. And as I watched this unfold, I began to watch that you guys operate at the tip of our Soul District, and that there are a lot of other plans that we had. Like, for example, MLK was our conscious decision to make a center of commerce on a major thoroughfare, but somehow or another that street no longer is significant. I also stopped considering and listening to any of these job training things and all that. I'm tired of us constantly teaching and preparing our community for secondary class citizenry, that we're always preparing them to work for somebody and to be a part of something work that they got to go in and do the work. Well, they can't have the ownership, or they can't have the ability to understand that this is capitalism, and in this world, without corporation involvement or corporate structure, that you're not really involved in wealth anyway. You just mitigating, or you just acting. So to me, that justice looks like ownership of some kind. Okay, the ownership of land, having some type of monetary reality that associates with this. But I'll leave y'all with this. Whenever I look at equity and diversity today and how we've arrived there, I look at a blatant attempt to mitigate our rightful position of some form of reparation. It was always the plan to mitigate that, because it seems that every time the word minority comes up, is that we live in a society when minority, the issue of minority, is so unique to where this society has even taken their mothers who had a conversation at one point in time, white women who came in and said, we don't like the way we're being treated. And they went into this sequestered reality to be able to come up with the feminist movement for women's rights. But the audacity of this country did not give them a platform of their own. What they did is said, you go over there, and with that issue, y'all get into this pool of Blacks, Hispanic, Jews, and whatever it is, and y'all stay in that pond, and we're gonna make everybody that's adversarial to our control reality is gonna be secondary and thrown into that pool of minority. Okay, and for us to have minorityship is, to me, anything that is separate from white people when it comes to reparations and it comes to justice and those types of things, it has to be absent of white people, because you can't share in both ponds. It's really difficult to have both ponds in existence. So for me today, it simply looks like this, is that when we talk about justice, we talk about ownership, we talk about the opportunity to control things within ourselves and our own community. And without mitigation, in other words, without those mitigating realities that are constantly put in place between us and that prosperity, okay? If you want to continue to show me that you don't trust me, that you don't value me, you keep putting committees and mitigating faculties between me and the resources that allow me to survive and to be able to compete in this society. And I'll show you a society that doesn't want me to succeed.
Thanks, John. We appreciate that, Mr. Washington. Mr. Edwards.
Thank you, Dr. Holt. I want to talk a little bit about restorative justice as well. And I believe that restorative justice has to be evidence-based, and there has to be some evidence of progress for our community. And It can't be some pie in the sky thing. It has to be something that we see that is changing our community and is improving our community, and there's some successes that we can point to. That's the only way that we're going to have, in my opinion, that's my definition of restorative justice. It's not going to happen overnight. I get that. But at the same time, I think the things that we do today will impact tomorrow and will change things for our community forever. So that even if we had the opportunity to look back, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, we would see improvements in the education of our children, and we would see improvements in our economics. We'd see improvement in our career opportunities, in our finances. All of those things would be improved in our community. This can be a template for that. And I think that's the opportunity that we're looking at here, because this land, like I say, was taken from us years ago. Now we're getting an opportunity to get this land back, and we have to make all the decisions that are going to make sure that we keep this land, but also that we benefit from this land, so that it doesn't go away, and that our community will benefit it for generations to come. Not just a few of us, but all of us.
Thank you, sir. And Nate.
Yeah, I appreciate both of those comments, and so that we don't have to necessarily live in the abstract. I'm gonna speak truth to power on what John and Keith just mentioned. I mean, many of you might already know this, but for me, generational wealth unapologetically means economics, and it means jobs. I mean, unapologetic. And why I say that, and if you know the Oregon history here, they had this thing, you could do your own research and look it up, this thing called Oregon Land Donation Act prior to 1850, when all of these so-called folks moved to Oregon. They were donated by government 320 acres of land, free and clear. All you had to do was cultivate this land for 4 years, and you got that land free and clear. And to make matters even worse, it wasn't just the white man, it was the white man's wife who also got to put some of this land in her name. So if a divorce ever happened, guess what? You were splitting up all this acreage of land, and your family was off and running with a whole bunch of acres to build generational wealth off of. So when we hear land, you're absolutely right. But guess what? Here's some other stats. Research shows a significant number, 228 years. If we maintain the status quo and we don't change our system and redesign these things that we're talking about around reparations and everything in between to accrue the current wealth to catch up with white families, it would take Black people 228 years if white folks never made another dollar in their life. Today terms, students in high to mid poverty, K through 12, Black, 74%, Latino, 74%, white, 31%. Median home income, 41%, 41K for Black people, 67K for white people. Home ownership, 44%. Doesn't talk about how big a house or how small, 44% for Black, 73.7% for white. Here's the kicker, STEM education, next generation. Black people in STEM education right now in Portland Public Schools and across our nation, 2%. White people, white kids, 73%. We're talking about jobs here, technical education, things that our schools are desperately needing. And then the last thing before I shut up and let others speak, and this is one that, again, with my position at NAMAC, I know this to be very true, and you can go run the numbers yourself. It says in the Portland Business Journal, the construction industry is one of the most accessible industries for a person who has an education or not, a criminal background or not, and certainly has high-wage jobs and salaries and benefits. Of the top 40 or top 50, excuse me, privately held companies in our whole state of Oregon, not just your Intels and your Nikes, 50 privately held companies. Of the 50, 21 of them are construction companies. Of the 25 top, 9 are construction companies. Of the top 5, 2 are construction companies. And guess what, y'all? The top 1, Hoffman Construction, is the top 50 in our city of Portland. In the industry of construction, 22.5 billion a year, not per development, a year in construction. And guess how many we have on the top 50 that represent Black and brown communities? Not a one, not a one. And you talking about over 4,000 jobs, if not more, in this industry, ready to hit the ground today. So when we talk about generational wealth, it always has started with a job. And let's talk about this poor Black kid that's talking right now. I didn't have a mom and a dad who ever had a house. I inherited debt, but I bought a house when I was 24 years old because I had a grandmother who told me that's what you got to do for your brothers to have stability. Today, I'm pretty much debt free because of having a house when I was 24 that brought me $100,000 in equity that I could use to pay off debt. So like when we talk about all this generational wealth and livability on streets and walking neighborhoods, I get it. But guess what? I don't know many Black people who think that they can live and walk around these streets like they used to in the 80s. They all in Gresham right now. So if we being real in this conversation today, let's talk about real facts. Our people ain't in Portland the way they used to be. So the only thing that to me gives any solace is what Keith said earlier, restorative jobs. Let's create a big ass facility for these kids to come to with $5 billion hitting the streets, not just this Rose Quarter project, but all kinds of projects around this area. And let's give them a training center. They don't need to own it. They can own their own, as John Washington said, start their own business, work up the ranks, get into the industry, start a job, do it like many have done it in our community before. And so it just, again, it gets me a little bit on the anger side when we don't have real conversations in here around how real generational wealth is built, unapologetic. So again, I appreciate being here today, but we need some real facts moving forward in these conversations.
This is so fantastic. Thank you, everyone, for your participation in the comments and your candor and your transparency. Let me reiterate why it is so significant and so necessary for us to continue this process. This isn't about a project. This is about a process. It's about us changing a narrative and being willing to lean in and be courageous to do so. This isn't about politics and positioning and posturing. It certainly isn't about coming into a space and pontificating. This is about us going to work and do something differently. We mentioned at the beginning of the first ESC meeting that this was risk and willing to take the risk to do something different. And part of that risk is creating spaces for this kind of conversation. It isn't always going to be comfortable. It's not supposed to be. It's not always going to be easy. It's not supposed to be. You're not always going to like what you hear. You're not supposed to. But this is the work that's going to happen if we're going to move the needle forward. And unapologetically, I'm committed to helping us do that. Who am I working for? I'm working for the benefit of the community that is not sitting in this room. It's not sitting at this table. It doesn't have the opportunity to come into this space. I'm working for those who deserve the best opportunity. And so let's think about the win-win. Let's go to work and do what's necessary for this next phase. So I appreciate it. We're at our time, guys. I'd love to have other comments. We're at our time. Can I pull up the slide for next steps? And then we will wrap up our day. We will come together and create more opportunities. So much to say, so much to happen. Our next slides. Right after next steps. Yeah. Thank you. Our upcoming dates as they stand. It was indicated during this meeting that we would gather or work at gathering and creating spaces for the Executive Steering Committee and HAAB to be consistent, collaborative, and cohesive. We're going to do our best to bring the COAC in as opportunity provides. But as you see, these are the dates that are presently set. Let me end with this as we're wrapping up our meeting. Marlon mentioned this, and it's heavy on my heart. I've had several kids and or friends who've lost loved ones in the last few days. We are in a crisis situation in our city. And I think it appropriate for us to end with some moments of silence as we think about what we're facing and what we're dealing with. Thank you, HAAB members. Thank you, ESC members. I appreciate your commitment to be involved in a major lift. Take care of yourselves until we see each other again. We will be in touch. Stay safe, stay healthy. Have a good night, everybody.